All right. I think we should probably, even though it is Christmas, I think we should probably accomplish something. Well, not that we aren't accomplishing something now, but did you guys like the cookies from Costco?
Yeah.
Aren't they good? I managed to squirrel away, since you didn't eat them, I squirreled away a whole flat of them for me. I did make some more of the teas, so if you want the green tea that I like or the roasted one, those are back there in the small pots. One thing about tea that's kind of funny, and you'll notice, is that the longer it sits out exposed to air, the darker the color becomes. They oxidize just like stuff like bananas and apples do. So they turn darker over time. Like when you first make that green one, it's kind of this pale green color, and now mine is almost brown. And it's just because it sat out for a little while. It's not a bad thing, it's just exposed to the air. If you have the one that's the roasted one, that one brews darker, so it's harder to see. But if you want more, those are there. Like I said, thank you to all of those who brought food for us today. It's kind of fun to do once in a while. Maybe we'll have to think of something like once a month or something. We can do a little bit of food something. Although, you know, you guys made me break my rule today and I had more than one cookie. That was bad. I'll have to run an extra mile. Yesterday I ran 7.5 miles. That was a good run. That was a good run. So, since, like I said, today is a little bit special, I don't know if I dare do this, but we'll see. Do you guys have questions that you want to ask me or that you've been wrestling with on chapter 2? I mean, not that you can't ask questions in a normal one, but usually we have you do questions at your table because I want you to chew on it as much as anything. Those little pots are kind of special because they keep liquid hot for a long time. Like sometimes after Bible study, if there's tea left, I'll save it in there. And I've come back the next day when I come to the office and it's still warm. They work really well. They were from, I don't know, some kind of kitchen supply store that the church uses for some of the other things. I don't know, Barb and I went there one time. It's kind of off of Main Street.
You can get them off the restaurant too.
And yeah, you can find them in lots of places. That's where I got those. People have asked before too, those loose leaf tea bags that I have are from Creative Kitchen, I think. Most tea stores sell them. If you just look for loose leaf tea bags, you can find them. But part of it is that when you're doing loose leaf tea, you want a bag that can like expand, because tea leaves like to breathe. They brew good tea when they're sort of surrounded by water. So tea balls are like the little things that they sell you that are like the end of a spoon. Those are bad. They don't make good tea because tea leaves need to expand and be surrounded by the water. And so you can get those, but they're good. Like the ball has to be big so that when the leaves unfurl, they can grow to their right size. Because some of them, depending on what kind of tea it is, like some teas, oolongs for instance, often come rolled into these little pellets. And they're little tiny pellets. They look like little rocks. And you can put a half a teaspoonful of those pellets in your boiling water, and when you're done, it'll be this big. Because they unfurl, like they're full-size leaves and they're, stacked in there. And so you can kind of see that if those are constrained in a tea ball, then they don't get to unfurl and they don't release their flavor in the same way. So it's better if you get something that can expand to a larger volume. Some of the fancier bag tea companies will have tea bags that are like that as well, where they're bigger and they allow the leaves to grow like they should be able to. I'm sure you wanted to learn more about tea today. Someone asked me when I started drinking tea, and I think it was in seminary. I had a few good ones. And then there used to be in malls a company called Teavana, and then Starbucks bought it, and then they closed them. I found some there that I really liked at first, and that kind of launched into things. Teavana could get a little bit expensive. You have to sort of reframe your brain when you start thinking about tea, because if you think about it in price per pound, lots of teas are insanely expensive. Like that green tea that I like, that Green Monkey King, which is my favorite one, it's probably over $100 a pound. It's probably like $150 a pound or more. But you have to understand that a pound of tea is a terrific amount. Like a pound of tea makes thousands of cups, if not more. Like you don't buy tea by the pound, you buy a few ounces of it. So a lot of good teas are like $10 an ounce or something. And that sounds expensive, but it makes a lot of cups of tea. I don't know if I've told you before, I learned this the hard way one time a few years, this is years ago now. I was in Wahpeton, and little old me looking on Amazon, I found a pound of peppermint. I thought, pound of tea, pound of coffee, that's kind of the same thing. It was like $15, so I ordered it. And a pound of peppermint is not the same as a pound of coffee. Turns out that leaves are much lighter weight. And so the thing when it came was about this wide, was about that tall, and was about like this. And we drank it for 3 years and gave away tea to everyone that we could, and it was still left over. And I think after 3 or 4 years, my mom finally threw some away. It turns out that a pound of tea is a lot. And you don't make that mistake too many times before you realize, like, how am I going to drink all this? Before the pandemic really set in 2020, I was concerned that tea supplies were going to be adversely impacted, because most of the teas that I like come out of China and Taiwan. And I suspected they were going to lock down and be unavailable, so I ordered a lot. Even the person was like, "You got a big discount. How did you get that big of a discount?" And it was like, "Oh, I ordered some." I think I ordered about 4.5 pounds of tea.
You were ready for the apocalypse.
Needless to say, I'm still drinking it and sharing it with people. But it actually keeps very well. So, on to scriptural things.
Why are the Israelites such the favored people?
Why are the Israelites the favored people? This is a fantastic question. This is one that I have asked again and again and again. And there's a lot of ways to ask the question. Why does God like Abel and not Cain? Why does God choose Jacob and not Esau? What do you think the answer is? Who does God choose? Let's start with that. Who does God choose?
The non-believers?
I hope not. Otherwise, what are we doing? Who does God choose?
Those you can work with?
Yeah, basically everyone, right?
Oh, yeah.
That God wants to save everyone in the world. So God works with everyone He can in whatever way He can. And so you have this sort of puzzle in the Old Testament, because God clearly does choose Abel and not Cain. At least it sounds like that in the story. And God chooses Jacob and not Esau. In the Jacob and Esau story, it's a little bit easier to see. Does anyone remember Jacob and Esau? So Esau is the firstborn. So by legal right, the stuff should go to him. But what happens?
His mom intervenes.
Well, the mother has issues. Yep. There's definite issues, and we could say that God gets even. But what happens with Esau and Jacob? Do you remember? There's a pot of stew involved. He was so hungry at one point that his brother convinced him to give up his birthright for a pot of stew. So he trades his birthright legally for a pot of stew. Is that a good thing to do? Be like, you could inherit $100 million when I die, or I could give you a glass of water. And Esau chose a glass of water. So what does God say? This guy's kind of a knucklehead. This ain't going to work. He traded what was most important, what he should have held most precious, because it was part of this covenant line, for a pot of stew that doesn't bode well for the future. He's sacrificing something that's worth a lot for something that's not worth much at all. In the story of Cain and Abel, what does Abel offer to God? The first fruits. I think Abel is a sheep herder, because I think it says he offers him like the first sheep or the firstlings or the fatlings or something. Like, Abel gives away his prized possession. Abel gives away what was greatest and most dear to him. Cain gives God some of what's left, not the first fruits. And so the story in the Old Testament is complicated a little bit because it doesn't dig into this kind of detail. It sort of comes out in the story later. Like, it doesn't say when Esau sells his birthright, like, this was dumb. That was a bad choice. Don't do dumb things. So I was telling the deacons on Saturday. Don't do dumb things. It's a good way to live. Right? But like, in the Old Testament, it doesn't come out and say that directly. You have to think about it a little bit more, and usually the results of things come out in the story. So you learn that this was a poor choice when ultimately Jacob manages to squirrel away the blessing from Esau. But remember that God is also a God of justice, and so Jacob, who's been so tricky and managed to trick Esau into giving up his birthright, ends up in quite a bit of a conundrum, because he gets the wrong wife and has to work for like 6 years or 7 years? 7 extra years to get the right wife. And it's sort of like, you could see God's providence snickering in the corner like, haha, got you.
Yeah.
And then when he's coming back, he's a little bit scared of Esau, right? He's not real excited. So what does he do? He does some rather funny things. He starts sending ahead of him gifts and messengers and all of these things to like bribe him to go away. And it doesn't work. And I think Esau's relishing his revenge a little bit. Jacob is terrified of him at this point because Jacob knows that he stole his birthright. And Esau seems to milk it a little bit. He's definitely playing a brother. He doesn't tell him right away that he's not going to kill him. So there is a sense of justice in the story, but when it comes to the people of Israel, I think it starts to make a little bit more sense. Why does God choose Abraham? After all this, why does God choose Abraham? Because he was faithful. I think that's a part of it. The way that I would say it is because Abraham listened. Who did God want to call? Everyone on earth. Who was listening? Practically no one. That's the reason why I think Abraham ends up being the father of the nation of Israel. Now, he does stand in the covenant line. He's in the genealogy of the story. Like Adam is a father of Seth, who's a father of, and on and on and on and on. There's all of that. But God calls Abraham because Abraham listens. God calls people who are willing to work with him, and he does everything he can with them. And so in the time of the Old Testament, I would say that it's in huge part like Israel is a chosen people because they listened. And so that was a place where God began his work to unfold his providence. But from the very beginning of the story, you can tell that the covenant is meant for the whole world. That it's not just for the people of Israel. Oh, would someone mind closing our door? They're practicing for the school program because Deacon prayed for all the snow last week and we got 2 snow days. His prayers are so good that it's not even 1 snow day, it's 2. If you ever have intercessions, you have to ask the deacon. Father Ross blamed me for Wednesday. He's like, "What'd you do?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I wanted a snow day." And then on Thursday, I didn't know that there was another snow day until I woke up. And I was able to sleep in a little bit, which was good because I was getting really tired. And I woke up at like 8:30 in the morning and looked at my phone and discovered that there was no school again. And I thought, well, I'll be. But like God chooses Israel from the very beginning to be a light to the world. And it doesn't come out as clearly until the covenant with David, that Israel is meant to be like a city set on a hill. It's meant to live in such a way and in communion with God that it demonstrates to the whole world of what a relationship with God looks like, that there's blessings for covenant faithfulness, and that the whole world is meant to be drawn to worship Him. That kind of, gets lost in translation a little bit, and the Jewish people start thinking of themselves as privileged above all others on earth. And like, haha, we have the temple, you don't. And eventually God says, it's not about having the temple. Like, I can smash the temple. That's rather easy. Jesus talks about how one stone will not be left on top of another in the great temple buildings. You know what's really fascinating? It's true. There's not an ounce of rock on top of the Temple Mount that was there that Jesus saw. It's all gone. The platform is still there, and the big rocks that were underneath it, but nothing that was built is there. It takes some work to destroy a thing made out of rock. I mean, that doesn't happen simply. So there is a sense that, like, Israel is a chosen people, but the New Testament wrestles with this question: what does it mean to be chosen? Who stands in the line of Abraham? Who are the children of Abraham? Because the people of Israel would say it's us because we were born, because we have the genealogical heritage, because Abraham is our father. And the New Testament argues against that. What does the New Testament argue? Abraham is our father in faith, not in genealogy. He's our father in faith, and the true children of Abraham are those who imitate his faithfulness, not who are his children. So you see that this is actually changing, it's shifting the landscape of how you are chosen and what it means to follow God. That it's not because you were born that way. Doesn't matter where you were born. Doesn't matter who you are or who your parents are. What matters is imitating faithfulness, is living in covenant with God. You can be from any people group in any nation of the world. You can speak any language you want, even if no one else speaks it, and still be chosen by God because you imitate Abraham's faith, because you choose to believe and live in covenant relationship. And it's not to say that there isn't a blessing for the people of Israel or there isn't a part of it, but St. Paul claims this in much of the New Testament, in the letter to the Hebrews specifically, that it's really about imitating the way that the great heroes of Israel lived. And if you do that, you're a true Israelite, and if you don't, you're not. So does that kind of speak to the question that, and this is something to wrestle with, like, it's like, shoot, well, what if I'm Esau? God offered me a grace, God offered me a gift, and I missed the boat and didn't take it, and now I'm like left out forever? And the answer is no. When David kind of has his little oops, or big oops, as it were, He actually has lots of them when you read the story well. But does God get rid of him? No. When John the Baptist questions Jesus about, is he really the Messiah? Right after that, Jesus praises John as being the greatest born of women. Jesus doesn't reject him because he has questions. The prodigal son isn't left out of the kingdom of heaven. He's invited back. The prodigal son leaves more than once. You have to imagine that the father in the story would maybe not kill the fatted calf a second time, but it will still welcome him in. You know, that there is a sense where God doesn't leave us orphans, that it's not, you can't change the past. And there are times where all of us have missed the voice of God, where we've done things that we shouldn't have. That's part of what sin is. Some of you might know, and I've heard from lots of people, that they raise their children in such a way that now they struggle with, because they know so much more now and would make such different choices than they did in the past. And you can't go back and change it all. And what is the result of that, we don't know. But you can live faithfully now. And that's what's most important. And you never know what God is going to do. Like, the best answer to what to do about it is to be as much of a saint as you can be. To live a life of holiness. And then, God will work through that. Now, it's also important to emphasize that it's not just your fault as parents. Kids have free will. They have to choose. They have to choose to believe or not. And it's hard because some of them won't choose it. That's one of the hardest things, I think, for parents of them all, is that you can do all kinds of things. You can raise them in a good home. You can provide everything. And some of them will take a path that you would not choose, that you would not like. I know someone in the area who struggles with this because, her son dove into drugs and, ended up I think in a car accident and killing someone and got arrested and was in prison, and, it happened fairly close to their home, that kind of thing. And you can't force them. I mean, sometimes it's amazing to watch parents with young kids. I just marvel at this because, when you have a pet, it's really funny to watch people who have a pet, and when a dog decides it's done walking and just lays on the ground and isn't going to move no matter what you do. And owners try dragging them for a while and it kind of works. And eventually you just kind of have to give in, because until the thing's ready to move, kids are even worse. It's hilarious. Because what was it on Sunday at Mass? There was a kid who grabbed his mom's scarf and was strangling one of his siblings. And mom is like, "Oh, don't do that," and grabbed the scarf away from him and tried to hide it. And the second she looked away, boom, right back, grabbed the scarf, pulled it out. And it's just there's little imps in a lot of us. And it was kind of funny to watch, because from the outside now, I mean, I'm not a parent, but from the outside now, it's okay, as a parent, you have to realize that this is going to happen. And so the only safe place is to completely remove it from their field of vision and their thought. It just has to be far away and behind something else that they can't get to. Because if they can get to it, they're going to. Or you see parents, one of the other funny things that you see at Mass sometimes is when parents try and reason with a screaming 2-year-old. And it's just it doesn't work. Oh, you should stop. There's these things. Nope, we're entering thermonuclear meltdown in 5, 4, 3, 2, boom. And it's just, at that point, sorry to tell you, negotiation is worthless. It would be easier to talk to ISIS. The only option is to take them out and calm them down, because they're far gone. And you can't save them from it. Now, as people get older and we're more reasonable, you can reason with kids, and you can, disciplines and punishments and rewards and all those kinds of things are a part of it. But, when they're young enough, it's just the way it is. Like, and if they crack their foot against a pew or something, like, you're not saving the situation. It's just, you got to take them out, bandage it, give them a cup of water, distract them, whatever, it's the way kids work. But, parents have figured out one of the really hard things, that you can't force a kid to eat what they refuse to. You can try, you can do all kinds of things, but if they decide they're really not going to eat it, you ultimately are faced with, what are you going to do? You can give in and feed them something that they like or maybe that they'll eat, and you can get concerned about their nutrition. You can decide, well, if you're not going to eat this, then you're not going to eat. Some of your parents did that, and most of you discovered fairly quickly that it was far better to eat things that maybe weren't your favorite than to go hungry all the time. What the right way is, I can't tell you. It's a bit of trial and error. But even with young kids, if they absolutely refuse, you can't make them do it. Unless you're going to force their mouth open, and then sometimes they won't even swallow it, they'll spit it out at you. It's just it can be a losing battle. And it's this is a 2-year-old. I can throw you up in the air, but you can't make them eat. So, in the end, I think that it is important to emphasize that God works with everyone that He can. That the sense of being a chosen people isn't something that is meant to be exclusive. It's meant to be inclusive. In the ancient world, it's tougher because, the Jews live in a world largely of paganism. And this is happening in the modern world too. The fastest growing group in the United States are people who profess no religion at all. This is very, very quickly becoming a major, major thing in our country and in our world today. So those are questions that we're going to have to wrestle with. Anyone else? Questions? Uh-oh.
It's in your outline, it talked about Jesus of Nazareth, and it said many people saw His miracles. They were not done in hiding. But
where is this?
It's on page 19.
Oh man, skipping ahead.
No, we're sure we left off.
Oh, is it? I don't know. You see how much I remember.
But so it talks about many people saw His miracles, none done in hiding. But in the scriptures, there's several instances of where, Jesus will perform a miracle or something, and it is don't go tell anybody.
Yes, this is another problem.
First thing they do is they go tell everyone they come across. What's that?
So what's going on with that? There is a bit of a puzzle with it, because Jesus says, don't go and tell everyone. Part of it, what happens when these kind of great signs are happening? If you think about it, if it was happening, for instance, that people were coming to our church and being healed of whatever, all kinds of maladies, what would start to happen? You'd have crowds, but crowds aren't so bad. Crowds at churches should be a good thing, even if they annoy us. But what else would start to happen? You'd get people looking for the miracle without looking for the person, without encountering God. You would get people who want to be healed of X, Y, and Z illness without actually finding the God behind it. So I think that's a part of it, is Jesus is a bit cautious because the miraculous can be very attractive. People are drawn to that. But ultimately, the life of Jesus isn't about performing miracles. Although He does that, the life of Jesus is about what? A relationship that He wants to introduce us to with God as Father. The life of Jesus is about, what was the reading this morning? The gospel this morning? You all remember my beautiful homily? Was words of wisdom that should be written in gold. Jesus came to save us from our sins, right? And so there's this mystery of who the Messiah is that's at work in the life of Jesus. So some of it, I think, is this caution around miracles and the miraculous, sort of overheating and becoming more about the miracles than about the relationship. Some of it, I think, is about who Jesus is. Some of it, I plainly don't understand. It is a little bit bizarre that there's all these people that ignore what Jesus said. It's like, well, are they supposed to do that? You know, but some of it is also that Jesus is cautious because there's a time for his revelation to the people of Israel and the people of the world, and there's a time where he remains somewhat hidden. And he doesn't want things to happen too soon. Like it's on this kind of calendar. So earlier in his life, for instance, when the Pharisees approach him, he disappears. There's several stories about how he sneaks away through a crowd and just disappears. Later in his life, he punches them in the face. You know, he plainly calls them on the spot. He plainly challenges their authority. What's the difference? Well, he knew when his time was. So part of it is that kind of timing too. I do think it's hard to understand. I mean, I certainly don't claim to have the answer as to why there is this secret about it. I think that some of these things at least help me start putting pieces together, that all of these different things. But I think it would be really hard to tell, it would be hard not to tell people about it. It would be hard not to say something. You know, you even think in your own life, the counselor that I see recommended this podcast called Tell Me About Your Pain. It's been fascinating because it's a story about chronic pain and how it becomes what they call neuroplastic. Like that chronic pain is as much about brain pathways as it is about an actual physical thing that's wrong. And so they have this podcast, Tell Me About Your Pain by Alan Gordon. I've been listening to it while I'm running. It makes good listening. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm not listening very well. I don't know what they're saying. It's like, yeah, we're 6 miles in, 7 miles in, I'm hot and sweaty and it's not working. But it's a very different model of pain than most of modern medicine operates with. But part of it is also because there's actually horrible results for modern medicine and pain management. Like the effectiveness of back surgeries is worthless. Basically worthless. And people get mad at their doctors for not doing back surgeries. The 5-year rate of back surgery success is under 20%. It's horrible because it's just, they're meant to address these kinds of pain and they don't work. And there's all kinds of things in our lives like this. So I started listening to this podcast last week. I probably told 30 people about it already.